it splits the screen.
Okay. No, I can't share the screen with you. That I'm not so sophisticated, but I just want to know if you cannot minimize the screen. Wow. They won't let me minimize the screen. Let's see if I could do something else. Okay. I'm going to try this without minimizing the screen. So then, do you still see me? Steve, do you still see me?
I still see you.
Oh, okay, good. So this is exactly what I wanted to achieve now, that I could read the text without losing it. Okay, then? All right. We began discussing yesterday the problem of ger katan. How could a ger be misgayer when he's a katan? He doesn't have das. And the question is whether or not we can supply the das on his behalf. And that would come under the principle called zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. So I want to mention two sources which I didn't have at my fingertips yesterday when we started this discussion. And they are Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Rabbi Chaim Brisker. So let's see if we are able to figure this out. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says the following. Tosfos comes up with the following possibility of ger katan. A woman, a pregnant woman in this case, non-Jewish woman, comes to be misgayer, and she goes through Geirus, Tvila, and that will generate Geirus and Kedushas Yisrael for the ubar, for the fetus, in its mother's womb, without the fetus requiring its own Geirus. So the Geirus is chal both vis-a-vis the mother and the child. The child is obviously a katan when he or she is born, and thus you have a ger katan. You'll ask, where is the das? I mean, the katan doesn't have das. The answer is because the Geirus of the mother encompasses the fetus as well. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger is bothered by this. And he says that this premise of Tosfos should depend upon two opinions, a basic machlokes, about the status of an ubar, b'mei imo, and its relationship to its mother. We have one mandiomer that says ubar yerech imo, that the ubar is a part and parcel of the guf of its mother. And according to that opinion, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, Tosfos works out beautifully. Because if the ubar is part of the mother, then the das of the mother to be misgayer is effective for the ubar as well, because it's one entity. But asks Rabbi Akiva Eiger, we have another man d'Omar who holds ubar lav yerech imo, that the ubar is not an extension and part of the body of its mother, but rather a separate entity. It's got its own identity, independent of the mother. And according to that opinion, argues Rabbi Akiva Eiger, we're back to square one with Tosfos' kasha. The mother would have to be operating on behalf of the child, of the fetus, through the mechanism of zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. It's not that the Geirus of the mother is chal on the ubar as one entity, because the ubar, according to this man d'Omer, ubar lava yerech imo, is a separate, independent entity. Once it's a separate independent entity, then you're going to have to introduce the das of the mother operating on behalf of the ubar, and that relies on the principle of zachin li'adam shelo b'fanav. which, as we said earlier, is a kind of a shlichus, an agency on behalf, in this case, of the Katan, and a Katan can't have an agent. So Zchia can't work on behalf of Katan. So how do we have on a Deraisa level a Zchia l'Katan for the Chalos Geirus of a Katan? You can't have a Chalos Geirus Deraisa. And even though Tosfos wants to suggest that maybe this whole entity of Ger Katan is only D'Rabbanan, but Tosfos is very uncomfortable about that. And he's striving, his goal is to achieve Geirus D'Oraisa that's not based on Zachar Li'adam Shlo B'fana. Well, that's true in the case of a pregnant woman if you hold Ubar Yerech Imo. And then there's one Geirus that encompasses both the mother and the Ubar. So you're not operating with the das of the mother on behalf of the Ubar, but rather one Geirus, and the das of the mother is for her entire body to go into the mikveh and be misgayer, but her entire body includes the Ubar as well. But argues Rabbi Kiveger, if you hold Ubar Lav Yerech Imo, then you're in deep trouble here in understanding this Tosfos. How could you possibly postulate a Geirus D'Oraisa in the case of a Katan when there's no din of Zachin Li'adam Shlo B'fana for a Katan, because the Katan is mufka from Shlichus? And if the mother and the Ubar are two separate entities, and that's called Ubar Lav Yerech Imo, then the mother would have to be Zoche in the Geirus with Hadas on behalf of the Ubar, on behalf of the Katan, but a Katan can't have Zchia on a D'Oraisa level. That's the kasha of Rabbi Kiveger. Are you able to follow that? Again, we want to assume that Tosfos works out even according to the Mandi Omar, Ubar Lav Yerech Imo. It would be very difficult to make the argument that Tosfos is going dafka according to the Mandi Omar, Ubar Yerech Imo. So at this point, we're going to introduce Reb Chaim into the equation. Steve, could you just verify that you hear me clearly?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to make sure. You know, with the technology, sometimes I'm insecure. Reb Chaim analyzes a sugya in Masechet Yevamos, which appears on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amid Beis. What's the case? Very complicated case, but we'll try to figure it out. A non-Jewish woman becomes pregnant with two male children, fetuses. They're obviously twins. Right now, she's not Jewish. And she's pregnant. That's called Hora'asam Shalo B'Kedusha. Then she undergoes Geirus. And these two boys, twins, are born B'Kedusha. That's called Leidasam B'Kedusha. So it's Hora'asam Shalo B'Kedusha and Leidasam B'Kedusha. And now the Gemara establishes that the wife of one of these two twins, as they grow old, obviously, is an erva to the other twin, which is called Eshes Ach. And that's going to mean that there's going to be Yibum in a case where the other brother dies childless. So we see that there's a relationship of achva, of what we call she'er basar, meaning they're considered relatives, because they were both born b'kedusha. Two brothers that were born b'kedusha. This despite the fact that there was horasam shelo b'kedusha. So Reb Chaim asks the following question, somewhat similar to the question that we saw in Reb Kivega. If you hold uber lav yerech imo, so it's not that the Geirus of the mother encompasses the uber as well. Each uber, in this case there are two of them, each brother requires a Geirus unto himself. So what you have here in front of you with a pregnant woman who's got twins in her womb, you have here three different personalities, three different entities. And the Geirus process is going to be separate for each one of them. So you'll have a Geirus for the mother and a Geirus for each one of the two brothers. Now, if that be the case, we have a principle called Ger is Gair Katan Shenolad Dami, which means that a Ger is not related to any of his biological relatives. So why would the Gemara, how does the Gemara establish that there's an Ervi of Eishes Ach, meaning that these two twins are brothers, when Gershon is Gair Katan Shenolad Dami, they can't be brothers because they each had their own Geirus. So the Gemara of Chayav Mishum Eishes Ach in Yevamos Daf Tzadi Zayin Amid Beis seems to be in direct conflict with the principle of Ubar Lav Yerech Imo. How do we reconcile, asks Reb Chaim, the principle of Ubar Lav Yerech Imo with the Achva relationship of Chayav Mishum Eishes Ach? Says Reb Chaim, we must conclude mathematically that even if Uber Lav Yerech Imo, and if therefore each Uber is having its own Tvila, nevertheless, that's only as far as the Maisa Tvila is concerned. But in Geirus, there's not a separate Geirus for each one of them, but rather there's one Chalos Geirus that encompasses the mother and her fetus, or in the case of twins, two fetuses. So what does Uber Lav Yerech Imo mean, says Rav Chaim? It means that the guf, the physical body of the Uber, is separate from its mother. In terms of the chefza, or the guf, each ubar is separate, is a separate entity. That's called lav yerech imo. He's not part of the chefza of the mother. He's not an extension of the guf of his mother. So I have to agree, I have to concede that in terms of the Maisa Tvila, they're separate Maisa Tvila. And each one has a separate Maisa Tvila. There's a Maisa Tvila on the guf of the aim, and on each one of the gufos of the Ubrim, because Ubra Lav Yerech Imo. But as far as the definition in legal halachic terms of what we call the Gavra, of the personality, the Uber is not a separate Gavra from its mother. And therefore the mother and her Ubar generate, according to the halacha, according to the Jewish law, one Gavra. And therefore, as far as the Chalos Geirus is concerned, the das of the mother to be misgayer is like the das of the Ubar. You don't need a din of schia. There's no need for zachar the adam shlo b'fanav, because it's all one entity. So again, what Reb Chaim is basically doing here is he is distinguishing between the chefza of the ubar as a separate hefza, in other words, he's not part of one goof, as opposed to the gavra. In Hilchas Gavra, even if you hold ubar lav yerech imo and you have separate goof, but nevertheless, you still have one gavra. And that should answer Reb Kivega's question. What was Reb Kivega's question? How could you have a ger katan? It's got to be midin zoch li'adam. It has to be that there's a separate Geirus of the mother who's pregnant and a separate Geirus on the vlad, on the ubar, because we're holding now ubar lav yerech imo. If there's a separate Geirus on the ubar, then Rabbi Kivega's argument is that you need the das of the mother to relate and to generate a Geirus for the ubar. And that would be only effective through the principle of Zoch and Li'adam. She becomes like an agent supplying the das on behalf of the Mishalech who sent her as an agent. But a Katan can't have agency. There's no shlichus for a Katan. Hence, this whole entity of Geirus could not be possible for a Katan. There's no Zechiyah. But in the light of Reb Chaim, we have a good, clear answer to Rabbi Kiva. Even though Uber Lav Yerech Imo and each entity in Guf is a separate entity, it means what we call Chefza. Chefza means the physical body. So the physical body of the mother and the physical body of the child are two separate bodies. And therefore, in the tefillah process, each needs its own tefillah. She needs her own tefillah. And the ubar, and if in the case of ta'omim of twins, each ubar has its own tefillah. But as far as the chalos, as far as the halachic legal change of status as a result of the process of Geirus, there's one process of Geirus for all, for the mother, the ubar, and the other ubar in the case of twins. And we don't have to operate or introduce Zach and the Adam Shalom B'fanav, because it's one Geirus. Rabbi Kiva understood that if Ubar Lav Yerech Imo, then there's a separate process of Geirus for the mother and for the Ubar. Rabbi Chaim says no. In the process of, with regard vis-a-vis the process of Geirus and the Chalos Geirus, it's one Geirus on both the mother and the child. We don't need Zach and the Adam to have an agent representing the child. What does Uber Lav Yerech Imo mean? It just means that in the Masechet Tefillah, the Masechet Geirus, physically, the Ubar is considered a separate body and requires his own Tefillah. But as far as how the Geirus is effectuated and how it's Chal, the answer is it's Chal for all parties as one entity. And Zach and Adam is only necessary when you have two different entities. When you have the Geirus of the mother as one process, and now she is going to serve as the representative to effectuate Geirus on behalf of her child. Then you need Zachin, and we don't have Zachin with regard to a Katan, hence we're left with Tosas Kasha. But now that we've redefined the Geirus process, and we've said that the Geirus process is not a separate Geirus for the mother and another separate Geirus for the child, but that in Gavra, it's all one Gavra, and in Chalos HaGeirus, it's all one Geirus, one long, happy process of Geirus, then you don't need to come on to Zach and the Adam Shelo B'fan. Okay, then, so this is, I think, what we were missing in our discussion of yesterday, how you could have a Ger Katan D'Oraisa and not have to base yourself on the shoulders, stand on the shoulders of Zach and the Adam Shelo B'fan. Okay, then. So this is where we're going to end, and you have the link for the shir at 11. Okay, everybody has that. Okay, so we'll go on to that link at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much, and everyone should have a wonderful Chanukah.